Welcome to this month's Acting for Justice event. My name is Jack Jezreel. I'm part of the leadership team of Just Faith Ministries. I'm joined by my colleague, Leela Oakley, tonight's co-host, and we're delighted you could join us. So I'd like to begin as usual with a prayer, and this one comes to us from somebody named Venus Williams, not the tennis player. This one is actually written by somebody whose name looks like Venice, but it's pronounced Venus. You can look her up on YouTube if you like. And she writes this. Let us pray. You are awakening to the same country you fell asleep to, the very same country. Pull yourself together. And when you see me, do not ask me, what do we do now? How do we get through the next 4 years? Some of my ancestors dealt with at least 400 years of this under worse conditions. So continue to do the good work. Continue to build bridges, not walls. Continue to lead with compassion. Continue the demanding work of liberation for all. Continue to dismantle broken systems, large and small. Continue to set the best example for the children. Continue to be a vessel of nourishing joy. Continue right where you are, right where you live into your days. Do so in the name of the Creator who expects nothing less from each of us. And if you are not continuing all of the above in community, partnership, and collaboration, what is it you have been doing? And what is it you're waiting for? Amen. Before Leela begins, shares a few logistical details with us, I'd like to invite in another Just Faith colleague. Leela, is Andrea here? Great. Andrea Martin Gaddis is our Director of Development. She has a special request. Andrea?
Thank you, Jack. And thanks to all of you for joining us here tonight. As many of you know, Just Faith Ministries is a nonprofit organization. And so, like many nonprofits, this is the time of year where we make plans for what we can do in 2025. And so today we wanted to take a moment out of this one Acting for Justice this year to make a special request and ask for your support. Each month, we bring these free webinars where we invite luminaries, activists, and educators like the incredible Dr. Lewis Brogdon tonight to share their wisdom and sustain us in this difficult work of peace and justice. Maybe this is your first time attending an Acting for Justice event, or maybe you've attended 10 of these. But I've asked you today if you've benefited from one of these webinars, one of our resources, one of our 8-week programs, virtually or in your community. I ask that you consider making a gift today. And we have a special opportunity. Right now, a group of donors and board members are matching all donations up to $50,000. And so your gift will have twice the impact when you donate by December 31st. We're putting a link in our chat right now to our donate page. And to those of you who I see on here today who have already given this season, or make a donation when you sign up for an Acting for Justice webinar, or sustain us as monthly donors, I just want to take a moment also to say thank you so much. Because of you, we are already halfway to that $50,000 matching gift goal. And thank you to those of you who are considering joining them and maybe making your first gift of support tonight.
It's now my pleasure to introduce you to tonight's presenter, who happily is a familiar face on our Acting for Justice events. We welcome back the Reverend Lewis Brogdon. Dr. Lewis Brogdon is a religious scholar, public intellectual, author, and prophetic voice on the topics of Martin Luther King Jr., the debate about reparations for African Americans, nihilism in Black America, slavery in the Bible, Black religion, and the complex legacy of racism in America. He has accepted invitations to the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent, which is an advisory body to the United Nations Human Rights Council. He's also accepted invitations to the White House, as well as media outlets, churches, colleges, and community organizations nationwide. He's offered prayers at the National Press Club and the South African Embassy in Washington, D.C. He has lectured on Black studies in Jerusalem, Haiti, and the Bahamas. Dr. Brogdon has taught his Martin Luther King Jr. course at several education institutions, including a session with Dr. Cornel West, and has lectured at a multitude of colleges and universities. Dr. Brogdon is currently an associate professor of Black Church Studies and executive director of the Institute for Black Church Studies at BSK Theological Seminary here in Louisville, Kentucky, and is the author of many books such as Hope on the Brink, and most recently, The Bible in the Ashes of Social Chaos, an Introduction to Problematic Texts. Dr. Brogdon, we are just so glad you could join us this evening. It's all yours.
Thank you so much, Jack, and to the team at Just Faith Ministries. I want to express my profound gratitude for the opportunity to be in this moment with you all, to spend some moments framing some of what has transpired, not only with the past election, but things that have been going on in this country as far back as 2008, and their implications for the days that we are facing ahead. So I do count it an honor and privilege to come into your offices, your living rooms. Some of you might even be watching this in your car, wherever you are. This is sacred space, and these are some sacred moments for us to spend together as people committed to the work of justice. And so I'm excited to be with you all and want to wish you all a very, very happy holiday season. It is, in the words of that Andy Williams song, it's the most wonderful time of the year. I love Christmas time, and I'm looking forward to spending some time with my family here in just a few weeks. So let's get started. Tonight's subject is hope in hard places. So hope in hard places. And of course, I want to begin, you all know what has been transpiring in this country, that America is truly a house that is divided against itself. This echoes not only words that Abraham Lincoln voiced about the United States during the time of the Civil War, but is even a verse that goes back to the teachings of Jesus in the Gospels, where he talked about a house being divided against itself cannot stand. And in a real sense, that is the irony and the paradox of the moment in which we are in, is that we are citizens of one nation. We call ourselves the United States of America, but a lot of people have started to refer to this country as the divided states of America, because there's such deep, deep division. I have spent the past few years really trying to give voice to this real moral fight that we are in. This country is fighting for its soul. In fact, I did a previous Just Faith webinar on that, the fight for the soul of America. I've written an op-ed, extended articles. I've been interviewed by various media outlets. President Biden evoked this language of this fight for the soul of the country back as far back as the Charlottesville riots, and you all know what happened in Charlottesville. So we've just gone through another contentious election in a pretty lopsided victory that I must admit I was really, really surprised. I thought it was going to be a lot closer than it actually ended up being. So there are going to be a couple of resources that I've passed on to Jack and Layla, and they'll make this available. I want to encourage you to to take a look at the exit polls, to really spend some time paying attention to it, because I think one of the takeaways from the election is that there are some ideological shifts happening in this country. And I want to challenge us to maybe not just go with some of the same, some of the same, well, these people vote, for Trump, and just these people vote for Harris. We've seen some very, very interesting things. So pay attention to the exit poll data, because, for example, we see that white Christians, by and large, supported Donald Trump, and that's not just white evangelicals, which, of course, what the data shows us is that they turned out in an even greater manner than they did in 2020. Trump got 82% of the votes among white evangelicals, but even white Catholics, 61% are voting for Trump. Our mainline sisters and brothers, well over 50%. So white Christians, by and large, really, really showed up in big numbers. And then we've been paying attention to the data on the nones, those who don't have a particular religious affiliation, people who are racial ethnic minorities. Well, they're showing up, having voted for Kamala Harris. Just something interesting to pay attention to. Then, if you want to look at just racially, how you know how people voted. So almost 6 in 10 white Americans were voting for Trump. 85% of African Americans were voting Harris. So that's an interesting data point. One of the things that really surprised us was when you look at the Hispanic, Latino, and the Native Americans really, really showing up in larger numbers, voting for Trump. And I want to challenge my progressive sisters and brothers to really sort of step back and chew on that. Because I think the way we were talking about who was voting for Trump in 2016 versus those people who voted for him in 2024, I think there's some important differences that we need to pay attention to, that's going to inform some of the work that we're doing ahead. I wrote an article a few years ago, the increasing numbers of African American men who were starting to vote Republican, and that was years ago, and I ended up being correct, that we weren't making the kinds of structural changes that we needed to address some of those issues, and so you had more African American men voting for Trump than you had in previous elections, and so these are things a lot of leaders are starting to really try to think through, and so pay attention to the exit poll, as well as pretty extensive. It's almost a 75-page report, research by the Pew Forum, that really helps you to wrap your head around the whole issue of political polarization. Because I think we're going to need to really bring some nuance, and take some different approaches to how we are framing what just happened and their implications for the next 4 years. Now, what I want to tell you is there's a lot of folks who they're like, oh my gosh, they have election blues. They're really feeling, there's fear and a lot of apprehension about, we don't know what to expect. So I'm currently working on a pretty substantive article that I hope is going to be out in the spring. It's going to be talking about ministry and advocacy in an age of global change. Because what we have seen with this election is that it's a microcosm of global issues. And leaders are going to have to do the both and. That we're going to have to be able to pay attention to what's happening in our country, also to understand the relationship between what is happening in America and what is happening globally. Because whether it's work that the United Nations is doing, and I'm so thankful to be part of some of the advisory work that's going on at the United Nations that's focused on racial justice issues. So every time I'm at the UN, I'm always in the bookstore gobbling up these very, very expensive reports because I like to pay attention to the relationship between, what Black people are facing in America versus, these broader global issues. And we are in this era of significant change. Significant shifts are happening. And not only are UN reports documenting this, but even reports that our federal government is producing, where they are talking about intense and cascading global challenges. That we're kind of in this era of what the report describes as greater contestation, that antagonism and conflict is going to be the order of the day. And a part of the responsibility of religious leaders, religious communities, is how do we lean into that in constructive ways? How can we not be reactive? And so, what I want you to do is, while you're still trying to absorb the blow of the loss of the election, and there may be some who are on tonight's call that you voted for Trump and you're happy about that. But there's a lot of people who didn't, and they feel a certain kind of way about that. My challenge, and this is something that Dr. King wrote about in the '60s, is he warned people about getting caught up in the forces of reaction. And so, if you are a leader, don't be the kind of person that you're always responding, reacting to what is happening, but that you as a leader, you should bring perspective. You should bring a big perspective to some of the issues that we're facing. And this is why cutting edge organizations like Just Faith Ministries, they bring in people like a Dr. Brogdon, who can kind of help you to understand the relationship between these things, so that as you are taking up this work in your respective communities, you are doing so in a way that helps us to think about how do we be proactive instead of being reactive. So this is a graphic that I often use and tweak that may be the most important slide. It's not, but it's close. It is close. Because what we're dealing with in America is a toxic mix of chaos and decline. And there are sort of 5 sort of fundamental problems we have in this country. Okay. And and when it comes to the various social issues, various political issues, in one way or another, they are going to drill down to one of these 5 things, whether we're talking about issues of poverty, our vulnerable infrastructure. So I don't know if you have been following the whole news about China constantly with the cyber attacks, Russia with the cyber attacks. When it comes to our weak infrastructure, we're not just talking about our roads and our bridges. That we have been disinvesting in our infrastructure for so long that once the COVID pandemic hit, we didn't have the infrastructure in place to address it and to deal with it. That racism and xenophobia, they're neck deep, bone deep issues in this country. Political system is mired in dysfunction. And then our sort of meaning-making institutions, whether we're talking about our religious institutions, our educational institutions, they're really struggling. There is a complete collapse of meaning in this country. People cannot make sense of their world and their lives. And so that's why you're seeing the disconnect with churches, and less people are going to church than we have seen in previous decades. I mean, it used to be studies were measuring, you rated high on church attendance if you were going 2 or 3 times a month. Now if you go once a month, that's like the high bar in a lot of studies. And if you've ever pastored a church, I used to be a pastor many years ago, That's not a very high bar just to see a member once a month. You know, you kind of want to see them every week. So what ends up happening is we get these, what I describe as a triggering event. Now in 2020, we all know what that triggering event was. It was COVID. Uh, and what a triggering event does is it exacerbates, it exposes these sort of core fundamental problems and issues that we have in this country that we cannot seem to wrap our heads and our hearts around. Okay. And so sometimes, even though it may seem like things get calm, there'll be a triggering event, and it will just completely expose that we've got some deep, deep problems in this country that we can't seem to make progress. So then what ends up happening is we keep living through these cycles where there's change, there's reaction, there's extremism. And this is why, when I go back to this chart, it's a very, very toxic mix, that we are a country in chaos and decline. So you'll want to keep your eyes out for that article when it does come out, because I kind of drill down on some of some of these deeper issues and why it signals that this country is in serious decline. And I think and when I say decline, it's not as if the country's going to go away. Empires rise and empires collapse. Of course, they don't cease to exist. But when you start looking at various metrics, you see that America has been in decline for decades. When President Obama was talking about how America used to be one of the leaders in innovation and was trying to really encourage America to sort of get back to being this innovative country, we couldn't respond to it because of the messenger. The messenger was a black man, and so that took a life of its own. And of course, we're still dealing with a lot of that. But it's just take a moment to think about what has transpired in this country for the past 4 years. I mean, the attack on the Capitol, the insurrection. We've had Roe v. Wade and affirmative action overturned by the Supreme Court. You've got fundamentalism on both sides. So you've got a lot of progressives who are as fundamentalist as their conservative counterparts. And it takes training and philosophy to kind of understand how fundamentalism works, getting into issues of epistemology, and that there's only one way to frame a particular issue. Conservatives aren't the only people who can do that. So some of the ideological shifts we're seeing in this country is that people in local communities are pushing back on the paternalism and the arrogance from the progressive left. That sort of we know best. You all don't understand your lives in this country, and so people are starting to push back from that. And so I think progressives are going to have to, remember that 1 Corinthians chapter 11 is in the Bible for everyone. That we have to examine ourselves. It's not always pointing the finger at what other people are doing, but it's saying, where are our blind spots and where are our weaknesses? And in what ways are we contributing to some of the dysfunction that we see unfolding in this country? So a lot is going on, a lot of change, a lot of reaction, a lot of extremism. You're talking about a former president who was almost assassinated. Okay, so this is the kind of political environment that we are living in. And there were certain people on the sort of progressive side that tongue in cheek were like, man, I hate that the person missed. And this is this is how sad it's really come, that you will have people of goodwill wishing someone got shot and killed. It's like, aren't we better than that? So these are just some of the images of what has been transpiring. And this is why we need moments like this to just kind of pause. You have no idea how many books are going to be written about the past few years that you've lived through. Okay. What has become normalized in this country, where where you're just talking about reaction and complete extremism. I mean, this is extremism that so many normal Americans are participating in. And so when we get on the other side of these triggering events, in this election, it is kind of one of those triggering events. That people are just, I mean, some of you tonight, this is kind of how you feel. You're you don't know how to feel, what to make of what what has happened over the past few years. What does this mean for the journey ahead? And so what I want to do is take off the scholar's hat and put on my minister's, my preacher, my pastor hat for a few moments, and to circle back around to some places in Scripture that can help us to ground ourselves. And then I'll put the Black church scholar hat back on and also talk a little bit about the Black church tradition. Because while some of my progressive sisters and brothers is like, oh my gosh, I don't know what we're gonna do. Like, this country, is in such a bad place when your ancestors have been enslaved for over 240 years, followed by another century of neo-slavery. We're kind of like, no, this is America. Uh, you know, so while I was surprised by how lopsided the victory was, I wasn't surprised that Trump won. Okay, I mean, this is America. And the point before I get to these places in Scripture is I want to remind you that you are a part of something bigger. I want you to understand you are a part of something bigger, uh, bigger than whatever the city you live in, bigger than whatever the state you live in. You're part of something that's even bigger than country that you are living in. When we are a part of God's family, we are a part of God's kingdom. And the kingdom of God is a movement that is going to transform all of creation. Now, the problem is that God's timetable is much bigger than ours. And we kind of want God to wrap this up and fix this stuff in our lifetimes. And while it would be wonderful if that were to happen, there is a cosmic scale to what it is that God is doing that we are invited into. And because our ultimate allegiance is to this movement and being part of God's family, then it means there's going to be some discomfort and some moments where there is a profound dissonance and a profound disconnect with what is happening around us. I'm going to take you to two places in Scripture, one in Daniel and one in the book of Acts. And we like to take these stories and lift them out of their historical and social context. And many of us know the story of the Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace. It's one of the favorite stories in the Black church. If you spent any time in the Black church, you've heard a sermon on the Hebrew boys. In fact, some of the best sermons I've ever heard in a Black church involve this story. But most of the time, they're always taken out of their political and social context. These young men were political captives. They were taken from Jerusalem. They were members of the aristocracy, and they were forced to serve on the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so the whole story of Daniel is a story of people it's a story of captivity. It's a political story. And so the living out of their faith and the hope that they take with them to Babylon is a direct response to the political and the social conditions. And so one of the things that stands out in my mind about their response to the king, because the king was like, if you all don't bow, we're going to throw you in this furnace. Okay, because I mean, this is what powerful empires, they want to, they think they can exert complete control over you. And the Hebrew boys was like, look, the God we serve is able to deliver us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow. Now, so when I preach this, the sermon title is "Even If He Doesn't," okay, because that's exactly what they said. Now, what's so powerful about this is that they wanted to be delivered, okay, but they were also ready for the prospects of unanswered prayers, failed expectations, unmet needs, and they were also ready to not be delivered. Now, in the story, they get delivered. But the powerful truth is that they had a faith that says that even if it doesn't go my way, even if the election doesn't go my way, even if the Supreme Court decision doesn't go my way, I'm not going to lose faith. I'm not going to lose hope. Why? Because I'm a part of something bigger. And that's a very, very important truth to hold on to. There's another story in the New Testament in Acts. It's a story of imprisonment. And again, there is a political and social dimension to this story. The only reasons they are arrested is because you have the criminal justice system being mechanized by the powers that be to persecute this new religious movement. And so here you have Paul and Silas in prison doing something that's a little paradoxical. And I'm sure there's probably not two people who are on this call tonight who've been doing any singing and praising ever since this election. If you wanted Harris to win, I mean, think about this from the perspective of women. That this is the second time we've had an overqualified woman losing in a lopsided manner. And as much as we want to kind of point the finger to the Republicans, the fact is Trump pretty much got the same votes he got in 2020. All the people who turned out to vote for Biden would not show up for Harris. So there's something about that we cannot get the Obama coalition to show up when women are on the ticket. So I don't know. Many women have felt like Paul and Silas, you can kind of be in this difficult moment and you are praising God in prison. But there is something about the gospel, and when we realize and recognize that we are part of something bigger, that even in the hardest of places, even when the political and the social conditions are not ideal, there's still something on the inside of us that allows us to praise. And this is why I love being a part of the Black church tradition, because our faith and our hope have been forged in the difficulties of slavery. So we sing, we march in the face of overwhelming evil, and we're able to do it because we understand the power of the gospel. And I think that's what we're going to need to hold on to, because that's the only reason they were able to survive the cotton fields. It's the only reason they were able to survive the dogs and the fire hoses and the beatings and the arrests and being told we're going to pass a law and the law doesn't get passed, and they keep marching until the law gets passed. They keep singing, they keep praying, they keep pushing. That's what we have to do. The Black church tradition is a tradition that knows how to have some hope in some very, very hard places. And this is why Dr. King, I mean, one of the most powerful moments, I think, in American history, this man knows he's going to be assassinated. He wasn't even supposed to give a speech that night. He shows up, he gives the mountaintop speech. He says, I want to live a long life. But he says, I'm not concerned with that. I just want to do God's will. Okay, because he understood deep within himself that he was a part of something bigger, and that no matter what people were going to do. So this is why he can say, I'm happy tonight. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the coming of the glory of the Lord. How in the world, knowing you're getting ready to be killed, can you say you're happy tonight? That's hope in hard places. And so to me, the gift of the Black church tradition to the progressive movement is this: don't tie your faith and your hope to outcomes. Tie your faith and your hope to this movement that we are a part of, this movement that is going to triumph over evil and hate. Because we're kind of in a moment where faith is being cheapened, whether it's through materialism. People think, okay, I can use God to advance my social program. I can name it and claim it, however. There is idolatry, where people think, they're almost a reflection of God. God is like us. God is us. God is my possession, not one who belongs to everyone. Or there is this whole escapism, whether it's people who are just obsessed, I just want to go to heaven, people who are just focused on their own personal issues, or who are just stuck in the trappings of congregational life. This is a graphic as I transition to my close that's going to help you to nurture the hope in hard places. So it's leaning into those experiences of the world as it is, okay, not as it could be. So Reinhold Niebuhr used to push back on progressive saying that we are too naive, that we're not sober. We must make sense of the world as it is. So when hope gets challenged, gifts and the resources of the gospel is that God gives us spiritual strength and community. You're not alone. Christian tradition teaches us to be realistic about injustice and suffering in the world. Okay. And this is why, wisdom and truth helps to guard hope, that we must be a people that's going to be committed to wisdom and truth. And this is why I said, go back to those exit polls, because you must operate in wisdom and not sort of just anecdotal stuff and letting the folks who are part of the 24-hour news cycle do all the thinking for you. That we must operate in wisdom and truth, because it's going to guard hope. Hope must be guarded. And the gift of the Black church tradition is that no matter what the social and political conditions are, we don't allow those things to define us. So our ancestors used to say, no, I'm not a slave. I'm not that. I'm a child of God. In other words, it's saying, you can enslave me and you can put it on the books. You can say it's illegal to do it. I am not a slave. This thing that I'm a part of, that's what defines me. I feel like preaching tonight, y'all. Not what the social and the political conditions and situations are saying. So, if I was preaching in church, I would leave you with my definition of hope, which is an abiding belief and expectation of good things and better days in the face of despair and pain. That's the hope that comes out of the Black church tradition. That's the hope that I want to share with you tonight. So if I was preaching, that's how I would sound. But artificial intelligence tells me I should say it like this. Hope is a steadfast belief in expectation of better days and positive outcomes, even in the face of despair and pain. So that's artificial intelligence take on Dr. Brogdon's quote. That's hope. And I want to leave you with the serenity prayer that I dip in chocolate. And the serenity prayer dipped in chocolate, and you can switch out the racism with any social issue. Will you pray with me? God, grant me the serenity to accept that I cannot eliminate racism. I cannot eliminate suffering in the world. But grant me the courage to stand against it, the wisdom to forge a better tomorrow than the limitations of today. Living one day at a time, enjoying moments of joy and goodness as they come, accepting hardships as the inevitable product of a fallen world, taking as our ancestors did this sinful country as it is while working to make it what it should be, trusting that eventually God will make things right. As I participate in and surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life, supremely happy with God and the company of all in heaven in the next. Amen. Thank you, my sisters and my brothers.
Thank you, Dr. Brogdon. We're very grateful. We're going to have a robust opportunity to have some questions and answers. So we're going to do that in just a couple of minutes. But before we continue with our Q&A session, and we'll give you a few moments to submit your questions to Dr. Brogdon in the chat. As you write, let me just mention several of our programs that you may want to consider going into 2025. As Dr. Brogdon has made very clear, 2025 and beyond are probably going to be very difficult years. And whether the topic is immigration, preventing gun violence, racism, environment, or hunger, we'll all have a lot of work to do. And as we do our work, of course, it will be to our advantage to be well informed and to invite others into the work of faith in action. So please know that Just Faith Ministry stands ready to help. I also wanted to alert you that based on the success of our Advent program in 2025, we will be offering a 6-session Lenten program in addition to our first bilingual program that we will be releasing in the spring. So if you're new to Just Faith, please go to our website and look through the portfolio of programs that we offer. There's never been a more critical time for the work of education and justice. So just to remind you, here is the invitation that we often issue. Bring one of these programs to your community or church. I've said this in the past. It's one thing for you to get educated, but bringing 8 or as many as 12 people along with you makes the work 8 to 12 times more impactful. You don't have to be an expert on these topics or have experience leading groups in order to be a facilitator. We'll give you all the resources and training that you need. So please consider in 2025 starting or leading a Just Faith group in your community. And finally, we invite you to join us next month on Thursday, January 16th, for a presentation by Dr. Cecilia Gonzalez Andreu entitled Immigration and the Golden Rule, Dispelling the Myths in the Current Debate about Immigration. We hope you can join us. Now let's see what kind of questions have come in, and Dr. Brogdon, I'll put these to you as I take a look at them. Here's the first question from Linda. Dr. Brogdon, from your extensive study of Dr. Martin Luther King, are you seeing parallels from that dark time in our history and today as far as being part of something bigger as believers and how we respond? You want to say more about that, Dr. Brogdon?
It's a great, great question. And I want to give a hearty, yes, there are striking parallels. As a matter of fact, every time I teach courses on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his theology, or whether I'm, offering public lectures, I always talk about the last book he wrote, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community? And pretty much Dr. King laid out the blueprint of what was going to unfold in this country. And we had an opportunity. We can build a country where we can all thrive together as sisters and brothers. He talked about the world house, or he sort of saw these fundamental, deeper issues, some of them that I outlined in that graph, whether we're talking about poverty, whether we're talking about racism, xenophobia, whether we're talking about militarism, which is linked to some of the problems we have with our criminal justice system. He was talking about these things are going to dog this country. And so we pretty much chose the path of chaos, and this is why we're seeing such extremism unfolding in this country. And so if you have not read Dr. King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, go ahead and purchase that book and read it over the Christmas break. As a matter of fact, not only should you purchase it for yourself, you should buy 2 copies and give it to a friend. And you should covenant to finish that book by the time you get to his birthday, that third Monday in January, and you start hearing everybody, throwing all these quotes around. You could add some substance to the conversation because you've actually spent some time studying Dr. King. So many, many, many parallels between what King pretty much he foresaw. We had an opportunity. We could have taken a better path, but we decided not to.
Thank you.
You're
Lots
welcome.
of very, very affirming comments, by the way, Dr. Brogdon. So lots of thanks here. But let me go to what looks like the next question from Elliot, who asked the question, which I find interesting because it's the first time I've heard the phrasing like you put it, that language of guarding hope. Elliot's just hoping you can maybe say a little bit more about that. It's first time hearing it, and what does that mean? Could you say just a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I hope is such a valuable gift. So, in a lot of New Testament texts, it's described as a charism, as one of the gifts. It's also one of the manifestations of the indwelling of the Spirit. But there's always this idea when God entrusts something to us that we're supposed to be good stewards of it. And so a part of being a good steward of hope, as we're taking up this work that God calls us to do, we must protect hope. Because if you lose hope, then it will fundamentally affect the way you sort of go about doing your work. So it's a qualitative difference between a person who is doing work with hope versus somebody who's just kind of going through the motions, doing things. Because often what ends up happening is you don't have that expectation that good things are going to be happening. We're working towards something better. God knows we wish we could fix all these problems where we wouldn't see any bad things happening. But we're not God. We don't have, none of us, we're not messiahs. Okay, so it's not our job to fix the world. It's not our job to fix the country. It's our job. Can we make things better? And I think, yes, we can do that. We can make things incrementally better. And if we're making things incrementally better, we're not doing this by ourselves. When one person is working, we're paired up with someone else. We're part of these organizations. Incremental change is something that must be celebrated, guarded, so that we continue to do the right kind of work the right way.
Thank you. Dr. Brogdon, as someone who's led churches in the past, do you actually have a response to other ministers who are preaching white nationalism and hatred from the pulpit? Is there something that you do, and is there something that you do that we could learn from?
But what I would encourage you to do is to go onto Facebook and to look up Joshua Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church. It's a local Black church in the city of Louisville. And I preached a sermon the Sunday after the election from a passage out of Matthew chapter 7. And the sermon was, everything that's called Christian is not Christian. Okay. And so what Dr. Snarton was doing in his church was taking his church through a study of, this whole phenomenon of white Christian nationalism and kind of what's, unfolding itself in this country. And so I wanted to come in and sort of give a sort of New Testament and a biblical lens to that, because just because people are throwing around the term Christian in our social and political climate does not mean that that's something that authentically reflects the teachings of Jesus and God's kingdom. And so it's kind of some of what we saw play out in the West with how the Roman Empire kind of co-opted this movement. And powerful empires, they do this, and it's just our turn where the American empire has tried to co-opt the gospel, co-opt the Christian church. And sadly, there are some people who who participate in the trappings of Christian religion but they are not serving the interests of God's kingdom and the gospels. They're serving the interests of the empire and the status quo. It's nothing new. Okay, I go all the way back to the writings of the prophets, where kings would get their own prophets on the payroll. They were called court prophets. And they would just tell the king what they want to hear. And so again, this is some of the reasons why religious leaders have got to get their prophetic voice back. And I think we must be prophetic against both sides. We cannot allow the partisan piece to completely co-opt the prophetic voice of the church. And so I think that um, my response is to call it out and to challenge it and to show just how old it is, that Jesus talked about those things, that he says, you know a tree by its fruits. And so I don't care what percentage of people are claiming this country is a Christian nation. Let's talk about the fruit, whether it's slavery, whether it's the genocide of Native Americans, uh, whether it's things like sharecropping, convict leasing, redlining. Okay, when when you got to pay attention to the fruit. If you're a fruit inspector, you gotta say, well, you might be calling it Christian, but this fruit is saying something different. And so we again, we have to be people of truth as well.
Yeah, yeah. Teresa writes in, and she's just mentioning for everybody's consideration the Poor People's Campaign as a potential galvanizing focus for people wanting to take the next step. Do you have any thoughts about that yourself, Dr. Brogdon?
No, I completely agree. I think the Poor People's Campaign, great organization. And depending on where you are geographically, finding those organizations, because there's no need to be a lone wolf. Okay. And a lot of times, and this was a part of the statement that I made at the United Nations, that what we need, because in 2 years through the Permanent Forum, we've created the biggest mechanism within the UN that deals with racial justice issues. And so that's very exciting. But my statement was that a lot of times in the US context, we're so disorganized that you have the same organizations doing the same things and they don't even know each other exists. That um, we need better collaboration so that we can better coordinate our work, and then we need to better report out the progress that is being made, because a lot of people, the reason why they lose hope is because they don't know about the progress that's being made, because all they hear every time they go to these conferences is people who are just talking about the nature of the problem. But I was sitting at the United Nations in Geneva this past April, and the Canadian government came and they just laid out, this is how many people of African descent that's in this country. This is how much money we've invested. These are specific initiatives that we are doing to address these issues. There are countries who have cabinet level positions that are dealing with racial justice issue. And sadly, when President Biden's representative spoke, there was nothing specific. It was just nothing but just a bunch of vague talking points. It was actually embarrassing. Whereas you have countries who are actually doing specific things, and that was encouraging to hear, because all we hear is, oh, there's nothing being done. When in all actuality, there's a lot of things being done. We need a mechanism that's reporting out, here's the progress that we're making. And so the administrator in me was encouraging them, can we create a research and reporting mechanism so that people who are doing this work can know, we have this focus agenda, here's what's being done, we've made some progress here, here's some of the challenges that we're making, so that so the organizations can say, okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to partner with that organization. So spend some time finding about who are the folks in your city and region doing some of this work.
Yeah. Dr. Brogdon, we're at the top of the hour, and so it's about time for us to call it a night. I want to close with reading what Nan wrote in the chat. She said, "Thank you so much, Dr. Brogdon. That was healing for my soul." And I would just like to invite all of those gathered here tonight for a silent clap for Dr. Brogdon in thanksgiving for his time and insight and wisdom and inspiration. Thank you, Lewis. We really appreciate it. Yeah, great. Again, thank you all for joining us this evening. Again, to repeat, we hope you'll join us next month on Thursday, January 16th for a presentation by Dr. Cecilia Gonzalez Andreu. The topic will be immigration and the golden rule. And so let us close tonight in prayer. This is a Christmas poem by Howard Thurman. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flocks, the work of Christmas begins to find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations and bring peace among the people, to make music in the heart. Amen. Thank you all, and good night.